The police called it a domestic tragedy. Neighbors called it unthinkable. But the truth is, what happened in that quiet Chicago suburb was a final move in a long, psychological chess game. A woman, a mother, standing over her sleeping son with a knife. Her husband, frozen at the door. And what she whispered, it still haunts him to this day. This wasn't sudden rage. This wasn't a breakdown. This was premeditated. And it started 2 years before that night. In this story, we're unraveling a story of obsession, betrayal, and the darkest side of a family torn apart. Daniel Parker never thought he'd fear the woman he married. He was 36, a corporate attorney with a spotless reputation, a gated home in Glenview, Illinois, and a loving wife. On the surface, her name was Natalie, a bright, composed woman who once worked as a school psychologist. She had charm, poise, and the kind of grace that made others envious. Friends often said the Parkers were that couple, the ones who threw tasteful dinner parties, volunteered at school fundraisers, and sent out Christmas cards with professional family portraits every year. But inside their home, things were far from harmonious. Daniel first noticed the subtle signs after their son, Caleb, was born. Natalie had changed, not just exhausted new mother nerves. It was a deeper kind of detachment. She insisted on total control over their son's routine. She wouldn't let Daniel feed him, rock him, or even comfort him at night. She's just protective, friends said. But Daniel sensed something else. Something calculated. By the time Caleb turned 2, Natalie had slowly isolated Daniel from nearly every parental decision. She dismissed his concerns, accused him of undermining her, and even began logging his interactions with their son, as if building a record. Daniel kept silent, hoping therapy would help, but Natalie refused. She said therapists twist things, that outsiders ruin families, he later told detectives. Then came the journal. One night, while Natalie was showering, Daniel opened a drawer looking for a charger and found a black leather-bound notebook. What he read inside wasn't a diary. It was a collection of notes, detailed entries about Daniel's behavior, documenting conversations they'd had, things he'd said to Caleb, even meals he'd cooked. The entries were cold, clinical, like a case study. Natalie had been tracking him for over a year. He didn't confront her. Not then. Instead, he made copies. He reached out to a friend from law school who now worked in family law. What do I do if my wife is documenting me like I'm a threat? The answer chilled him. She might be building a case for sole custody. From that moment, Daniel knew this wasn't just marital strain. Natalie was preparing for something bigger, something dangerous. But even then, he had no idea how far she'd go. Daniel started noticing inconsistencies in Natalie's stories, small details that didn't align. She'd say she took Caleb to a park, but Daniel would find no photos, no stroller moved, no sunscreen packed. At first, he thought it was forgetfulness, but as the pattern continued, doubt turned to certainty. One evening, while reviewing home security footage after the package theft, he spotted something else entirely. The door hadn't opened all day. Natalie hadn't taken Caleb anywhere. She lied. From that day forward, Daniel began collecting evidence. Not for revenge, but for protection. He installed discrete cameras in common areas. He synced the baby monitor to his private phone. He backed up files and encrypted drives she couldn't access. Not once did she question it. That was the most disturbing part. She seemed confident, as if she had already won. 3 weeks later, Daniel received a call from Caleb's daycare. They informed him his name had been removed from the authorized pickup list. Natalie claimed he'd moved out, but Daniel was still living under the same roof. He confronted her. Natalie didn't shout. She didn't deny it. She simply shrugged and said, "I thought it would be easier this way." Daniel realized then she was laying the groundwork to push him out of their son's life entirely. He contacted an attorney, the kind who deals with high-conflict custody cases. It wasn't just about safeguarding visitation rights. It was about proving that Natalie was manipulating the narrative, gaslighting, controlling, weaponizing motherhood. The lawyer advised Daniel to maintain the appearance of peace, No direct confrontation, no sudden moves. Let her feel secure. Let her believe he was passive. Then build. Daniel followed instructions to the letter, but Natalie was already steps ahead. She began documenting Caleb's minor bumps and bruises, photographing a scraped knee and marking dates. She hinted to friends that Daniel was too rough during playtime, that Caleb cried when Daddy came near. The framing had begun. Daniel's closest friends started pulling away, unsure of what to believe. His own sister, who'd always admired Natalie, called to ask if there was anything he wanted to admit. It felt like suffocation in slow motion. But Daniel didn't break. He watched. He listened. He waited. Then came the most telling moment. One night, while Natalie was on a call in the kitchen, Daniel overheard her whisper, "He thinks he's building a case. He has no idea I already filed." She'd spoken softly, too softly for someone unaware she was being recorded. Daniel took that clip straight to his attorney. Within hours, they filed a protective motion. It wasn't to remove Caleb from the home. It was to buy time. But Daniel's window was closing fast. Natalie's behavior became colder, mechanical. She no longer acknowledged Daniel at dinner. She spent hours in her locked study, sometimes until dawn. What she was preparing, Daniel couldn't know. But the moment he walked in on her standing over their son, knife in hand, he would find out. It was just past 2 a.m. when Daniel stirred from sleep. The baby monitor blinked, not from sound, but motion. A shadow moved across Caleb's room. The house was silent, but something felt off. Daniel reached for his phone, checked the live feed. The screen loaded slowly. A spinning circle. Buffering. Then static. He got up, heart pounding, not racing, but heavy, steady, like something waiting. The hallway light was off. Caleb's door slightly ajar. No crying, no rustling, just stillness. Daniel pushed the door open gently. What he saw would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. Natalie stood beside their son's crib, barefoot, motionless. In her right hand, gleaming steel, a kitchen knife. Her eyes fixed on Caleb, who slept without a sound. His small chest rose and fell, unaware of the danger inches away. Daniel froze at the threshold. The urge to scream, run, act, it all collided into paralysis. "Natalie," he whispered. She didn't flinch. His voice broke again, louder this time. "Natalie, what are you doing?" Slowly, she turned to face him. No panic, no surprise, only calm detachment. The blade still at her side. And then she spoke. "He doesn't belong to you anymore." Daniel's breath caught. Her voice was flat, controlled, as if she were reading from a prepared line. But there was something buried beneath it, rage masked by purpose. He took one careful step forward, put the knife down. "Please, he's just a baby." Natalie tilted her head. "That's why I'm doing this now, before he learns to love you." Those words felt like a gunshot to the chest. Daniel knew then. This wasn't a breakdown. She hadn't snapped. She was executing something she'd been planning. He moved with precision, walking the line between urgency and restraint. "You don't want this. Whatever you're feeling, we can fix it. You're tired. You're angry. We can get help." Natalie blinked slowly, then turned her eyes back to their son. She raised a knife, not high, but deliberate. That's when Daniel lunged. He crossed the room in 2 seconds, grabbing her wrist before the blade could drop. The struggle was brief, but violent. She didn't scream. She didn't fight wildly. She resisted with purpose. He wrestled the knife free and shoved it across the floor. Caleb stirred in his sleep, unaware of the storm surrounding him. Daniel pinned Natalie to the wall, shaking. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Her eyes locked on his. And then she said it. The sentence that would echo in every police report, every courtroom transcript, every night Daniel woke up in a cold sweat. "Now they'll believe I was trying to protect him from you." The doorbell rang moments later. Police. Natalie had already called them. Daniel stood there, Realizing this was never about rage, it was a setup, a performance, a final act in a script written months ago. When the officers entered and saw the bruises from their struggle, Natalie pointed at Daniel and whispered, "He tried to hurt our son. I stopped him." And just like that, everything turned. Daniel sat in the back of a squad car, hands cuffed, shirt streaked with sweat and blood, neither of which were his sons. Officers hadn't asked many questions. They had entered a room with a frightened woman, a crying child, and a weapon on the floor. The rest, they assumed. At the station, Daniel repeated his story. He woke up, saw movement, found his wife holding a knife over their sleeping son, intervened, and disarmed her. He asked for a lawyer. Natalie, meanwhile, played the role to perfection. Tear-streaked cheeks, shaky breath, subdued voice. "He came at me," she said. "I was scared for Caleb." Detectives listened. They nodded, took notes, but something didn't add up. Natalie's story hinged on Daniel's aggression, on the idea that she had no choice but to act. Yet when investigators examined the knife, it had her fingerprints, not his. And Caleb? He'd been completely untouched. No marks, no signs of distress. Natalie claimed self-defense. That Daniel had a history of temper issues. That she feared for her son's safety. She showed them her journal, the same one Daniel had once discovered. Each entry painted a portrait of a father who shouted, slammed doors, controlled conversations. She alleged emotional abuse, mental instability, even hinted at paranoia. But as detectives looked deeper, cracks began to appear. Neighbors described Daniel as calm, patient. Teachers at Caleb's daycare spoke highly of him. There had never been a complaint. No CPS visits. No prior incidents. Just a quiet, reserved man who walked his son to class every morning and stayed to help clean up after school events. Still, perception carried weight. Natalie had positioned herself as a protective mother. Her journal, carefully constructed, became the central piece of her narrative. Daniel's lawyer pushed back. He submitted audio recordings. Conversations Natalie hadn't known were being preserved. She wasn't the frightened victim she claimed. In one clip, she told Daniel, "It doesn't matter what's true. It matters who they believe." That sentence changed everything. Investigators reevaluated the case. They obtained a search warrant for Natalie's devices. Her laptop contained detailed outlines, scenarios, phrases to use during police interviews, descriptions of injuries she might fabricate. One file was titled, "If It Goes Too Far." Buried in her email archives, they found correspondence with a private investigator, the same one who had tracked Daniel's movements for weeks without his knowledge. The investigator claimed he thought it was for divorce prep, surveillance, custody strategy. When pressed further, he admitted he found the entire case odd. She wanted to know which knife would leave the most convincing injury without breaking skin. That statement forced a pause in the investigation. Suddenly, law enforcement wasn't sure who the threat really was. Natalie's version began to collapse under scrutiny. And Daniel, he was released from custody, but not cleared. The court ordered a temporary restraining order against both parents, pending a full psychiatric evaluation and custody review. For now, Caleb was placed in protective care with extended family. The system had moved quickly, but justice? It was still catching up. The courtroom was silent when Daniel took the stand. Months had passed since that night. Caleb remained in the custody of Daniel's sister under court supervision. Natalie hadn't seen her son in 12 weeks. But this wasn't a custody hearing. It was a criminal proceeding. The charge, filing a false police report, child endangerment, and attempted malicious prosecution. Natalie sat across the aisle, composed, her hair neatly tied back, glasses perched on her nose. She looked every bit the concerned mother, not the woman found with a knife in her hand. Her attorneys leaned in as a judge reviewed preliminary findings. Daniel's legal team opened with digital evidence, audio recordings from inside the house, dating back several months. In one, Natalie admitted, "I need him to see you as unstable. That's the only way this works." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Next came testimony from the private investigator she had hired. Under oath, he confirmed Natalie had requested surveillance strategies for use in worst-case courtroom optics. She asked for a list of non-lethal injuries that would imply aggression. She asked me how to make bruises look accidental, he said plainly. The prosecution followed up with excerpts from Natalie's computer, multiple drafts of fabricated timelines, a nap with scheduled messages, text intended to simulate distress, all timed for release after the staged confrontation. Natalie's defense pushed back hard. They argued that Daniel's recordings were obtained without consent, painting him as obsessive. They accused him of orchestrating a smear campaign, turning their marital collapse into a vendetta. They cited Natalie's journal as evidence of long-standing emotional abuse. But the forensic team had analyzed that journal. Entries had been created in bulk, entire months written on a single day, just weeks before the night in question. The court-appointed child psychologist then testified. She created an environment of control, not care, the psychologist stated. Her behavior showed clear patterns of emotional manipulation and coercive parenting. Natalie stared ahead, expression unchanged. When it was her turn to testify, she kept her tone level. I was scared for my son, she repeated. Daniel had changed. I did what I thought was necessary. But the prosecution had saved one final piece for last. A backup drive recovered from the family's home office revealed a video accidentally saved by a corrupted smart device that showed the full interaction in Caleb's room. There was no threat from Daniel, no aggression, just a father pleading, a mother refusing to let go of control. The video ended with her words, "If I can't have him, you won't either." That broke the case. Natalie's charges were upheld. The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Daniel regained partial custody immediately. Supervised at first, then full rights granted pending counseling completion. But the damage was permanent. This wasn't just a case of deception. It was a calculated effort to destroy someone's life, using the legal system as a weapon and a child as collateral. 6 months later, the house on Hawthorne Lane stood empty. Curtains drawn, mailbox sealed, a forgotten home once filled with polished furniture and silent tension. Daniel had moved out weeks after the trial. He didn't take much. Just Caleb's favorite toys, a few clothes, and a single-framed photo from better times, before the silence between him and Natalie became a war. He lived now in a modest apartment on the north side. Fewer rooms, fewer memories, but it was enough. Enough for healing. Caleb, now full, was adjusting. Children didn't process trauma like adults. His questions came randomly. Where's Mommy? Why did the police come? Daniel never lied, but never gave the full truth either. Not yet. She's getting help, he'd say, and we're safe now. Therapy became part of their weekly rhythm. Play-based sessions, drawings, and slow conversations. Caleb responded well. His nightmares stopped. He laughed more. He started sleeping through the night again. Daniel, on the other hand, was still learning how to breathe without flinching. He had been awarded full legal custody. Natalie's parental rights were under review. The court would revisit the case in 2 years, if she petitioned. So far, she hadn't. From prison, she sent one letter. No apology, no remorse, just a typed statement insisting she'd been misunderstood. Daniel never showed it to Caleb. He boned it without reading past the first paragraph. The community, once divided, began to come around. Neighbors apologized for their distance. Some offered help. Others simply said nothing and nodded politely at the grocery store. It didn't matter to Daniel. He wasn't seeking validation. He just wanted normal. But trust came slowly. Simple things. Leaving Caleb with babysitter, allowing a teacher to walk him to the gate, even receiving well-meant gifts from strangers, triggered unease. He double-checked locks at night, kept court documents in a fireproof safe, installed security systems even though the danger was gone, or at least contained. His therapist called it residual trauma, the kind that doesn't scream, but hums quietly under the surface. Still, Daniel was trying. He went back to work part-time, cooked breakfast every morning, started a tradition of weekend hikes with Caleb, rain or shine. They didn't talk much on those walks, just held hands, listened to the wind, and kept moving forward. On Caleb's 5th birthday, Daniel organized a small gathering. No decorations, no hired characters, just cupcakes, 2 friends, and a balloon with his name on it. Caleb laughed for hours. That sound, unforced, pure, meant more to Daniel than any courtroom victory. The case had left scars, yes, but it didn't end them. It began something else, the long road to safety, trust, and the quiet courage to rebuild. Not everyone escapes the shadows of manipulation. Daniel did, because when the system failed to protect him, he protected himself. And more importantly, he protected his son. This case isn't just a warning, it's a wake-up call. What happens when the person you trust the most becomes the one writing your downfall? If this story shook you, hit the like button so more people find out what real psychological abuse looks like, hidden behind polished smiles and perfect family portraits. Subscribe for more stories that dig beneath the surface, where truth isn't just shocking, it's devastating. And drop a comment. Was Natalie evil or sick? Was the system too late or just blind? Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and remember, not every danger comes with warning.